The outboard market has a secret everyone sees, but, no one wants to say out loud. Cheaper engines from across the ocean are slipping onto American transoms faster than the big brands expected, and the price gap looks almost too good to be real. Some owners swear they have found a loophole, others quietly regret a decision they can't take back. The real twist is that the difference isn't where most people think it is, and if you run a boat, any boat, you are already part of this story, whether you know it or not. The price question no one wants to spell out. Behind the counter at a lot of American dealerships, the same scene plays out over and over. A boater walks in with a tired engine and a mid-sized hull that still has a lot of life left in it. They want to repower. The service writer prints two numbers. The American four-stroke carries a price that almost equals what the boat itself is worth. The Chinese outboard, through a different channel or a smaller shop, promises the same horsepower for what feels like a bargain that borders on suspicious. On paper, the gap is not small. It is enough money to cover a new trailer, upgraded electronics, or a generous pile of fuel for the coming seasons. For someone who only makes this decision once or twice in their life, that is a powerful pull. They see one path that pushes their budget to the edge and another that fits with room to spare. What complicates things is that the cheaper engine does not look like a toy. The cowling is modern and, well, the paint is glossy. The brochure talks about four-stroke technology, smooth power, and a horsepower rating that matches the American model line for line to anyone who is not living inside a service bay. The two options feel almost interchangeable. It is easy to think that people warning against the cheaper choice are just defending their brands or are stuck in stories from an older era. The idea that you might be able to get away with paying much less for what seems like the same thing is, honestly, pretty tempting. To understand why that sometimes works and sometimes fails in slow motion, you have to step back and look at how these cheaper engines came to exist in the first place, how these motors became so cheap and, good enough. For most of the modern outboard era, the companies behind the badges were predictable. A handful of American and Japanese brands poured money into new platforms, cleaner combustion, and dealer networks that could keep fleets alive. They carried large engineering staffs, ran test boats in harsh water for years, and paid lawyers and regulators to certify that their engines met the rules. Along the coastlines of China, a different role was taking shape. Factories there began as quiet suppliers rather than headline names. They cast brackets and housings, machined shafts and gears, and assembled carburetors and harnesses that ended up hidden inside engines wearing more famous logos. Their work was important but, honestly, invisible to anyone walking a dock. As those factories gained experience with casting, machining, and assembly, another possibility opened up. Instead of only building parts, some began building entire engines based closely on older proven designs. An outboard architecture that a Japanese company had retired could be measured, modeled, and recreated with local tooling and materials. The core layout had already been proven to run by leaning on those existing blueprints. These builders were able to skip much of what made the original engine so expensive to develop. They did not have to bankroll huge research and development programs. They did not have to maintain large global dealership structures. They could target markets where enforcement of emissions and certification rules was lighter, or, just a bit slower. China's dense industrial clusters made this approach even more effective. Within a short distance, a factory could source castings, electronics, plastics for cowlings, fasteners, and packaging. Turning a copied design into a shippable product became a fast and relatively low overhead process. The result was simple and powerful. They could put an engine in a crate that offered similar advertised horsepower and broadly familiar features for a price that the big brands simply could not match. To a buyer comparing lines on a spreadsheet, it looked like a way to escape paying for a lot of overhead that they never directly saw. That is how a flood of Chinese names ended up on transoms that once would have carried only American or Japanese badges. To understand why some of those owners stay happy and others quietly regret the decision, you have to follow the story past the quote sheet and into the break-in period, the honeymoon phase that sells a lot of motors. Scroll through boating forums or stand near any busy launch ramp and you will hear a familiar kind of story. Someone has just mounted a brand new Chinese outboard on their skiff or pontoon. They are excited. They post pictures or wave friends over, and the first impressions are hard to argue with. The engine looks sharp, the decals are straight, the hardware is shiny, and the whole package feels more expensive than the price they paid. The first start is usually uneventful, fuel line connected, primer bulb squeezed firm, key turned, the motor fires and settles into an idle that sounds a lot like any other four-stroke in its class, a shift into gear, a push of the throttle, and the boat climbs onto plane. For that first day on the water, there is often a quiet sense of having beaten the system. There are reasons this first chapter goes smoothly so often. Many of these engines are built around simple, time-tested layouts. They use carburetors or basic injection systems, keep the number of sensors low, and run with far less computer oversight than the latest premium platforms. There is less software waiting to complain about edge case conditions. That simplicity can feel like toughness. A weak battery that might annoy a finicky modern engine often still spins a simpler motor to life. Slightly dirty fuel that would trigger warnings on a high-end system may just pass through and burn. The engine is less likely to refuse to run because some small parameter is not perfect. For an owner who runs mostly in clean, fresh water, keeps the boat on a trailer and uses it on just a handful of weekends each year, this can be all they ever see. The paint stays presentable, the engine starts when asked, and any small quirks are just written off as part of boating. When someone at the dock asks what it cost, the answer draws a reaction, and the owner feels quietly validated. Those stories are real, and honestly, they spread fast. They convince people that the warnings are exaggerated or maybe just outdated, but what they do not show is how the same engines behave when the hours add up. The water is not always kind, and the boat lives in a world rougher than an inland lake. That part of the story is written in slower, smaller ways, starting deep inside the castings. If you are listening to this and thinking, hey, that sounds like my boat, or maybe you have a story that went the opposite way, drop it in the comments. Tell me what you are running, how many hours are on it, and what actually failed or surprised you. I read those, and they really do shape what we dig into next. And if you want more deep dives like this where we pull past the brochure and talk about what really happens in the yard and on the water, hit like so this reaches more boaters and subscribe so you do not miss videos like this. So, what the metal is actually saying about your odds. You know, every outboard is, at heart, a collection of metals and tolerances trying to hold together through heat, vibration, and exposure. The difference between one that quietly does its job for years and one that fails early is not a matter of luck. It is really the sum of decisions made in foundries and machine shops that most buyers will never see. In the large American plants, the story starts with alloy recipes for blocks and heads chosen with very specific goals: strength under repeated load, resistance to cracking around critical areas, and predictable behavior when heated and cooled thousands of times. Castings are sampled and cut, inspected for gas pockets and porosity that could become the starting points of cracks years later. After casting, parts move through machining centers where bores, journals, and mating surfaces are measured constantly. Tolerances are tight, and parts that do not make the cut are scrapped rather than pushed along. It is, honestly, an expensive way to run a production line. In the long run, though, it changes the probabilities of how engines age. Head gaskets stay sealed longer, bearings run cooler, and threads hold torque through many cycles of service. In a lower-cost factory, the job is, well, a bit narrower. The castings need to meet shape and size requirements, and the finished engines need to run. Alloy specifications may be broader, and the level of inspection per batch can be lighter. Castings with more internal variation make it through. Machining tolerances can be set a little wider, gauges checked a little less frequently, and marginal pieces accepted because they still assemble and start. Engines built this way can and do run. Some last much longer than anyone expected. Others develop early problems. Mechanics who see a lot of them talk in terms of tendencies instead of absolutes. more stripped threads on certain mounting points, more hairline cracks on certain heads, more gear wear that shows up sooner under similar hours. For light use, these tendencies may stay hidden, but for boats that see real miles, heavy loads, and rougher water, the weaknesses tend to show themselves sooner. They blend into another slow, steady force that does not care about horsepower ratings or catalog language, only about metal coatings and time. How salt quietly rewrites the price tag. Saltwater is, slow and patient. It does not arrive all at once. It creeps into every compromise in metal, paint, and fastener choice, and then it waits. The way an engine is protected against that, honestly, matters more than almost any line you'll read on a brochure. Imagine for a moment two near-identical hulls sitting in the same brackish marina. One hangs an American-branded four-stroke in the mid-range. The other wears a low-cost Chinese engine with a matching horsepower sticker. Neither owner is perfect about rinsing. Both leave the boats in the water for long stretches because, well, hauling is annoying and storage is just not cheap. On the American engine, the underwater parts sit inside a system that was designed and tested as a whole. The raw aluminum housings went through specific treatments, primers were chosen to bond to those surfaces, and topcoats were abused in test chambers and on workboats before anyone put them on production engines. Fasteners were picked from stainless blends that balance cost with real corrosion performance. Anodes were sized and placed to draw corrosion toward themselves instead of toward the rest of the gear case. On the Chinese motor, what you get depends heavily on who built it. Some have paid real attention to this side of the